Hey guys, a while back I'd promised to do a video about tips, tricks, and tools to working with backline rented amps. Anyone who's done fly dates, you know the horrors and the challenges of using rented amps. For me, the last 25 years, almost everything I've done has been with rented amps. And sometimes you get a good one, sometimes you don't. Anyway, to jump right in, the first tip I would say is try to keep yourself as self-sufficient with your pedal board, meaning, sounds, EQ, and even your overdrives. If you can get those things from your pedal board, that can take some of the dependency off of the amp. And a lot of guys are doing this using Kempers and fractals and digital boxes, and they're getting great results. In fact, some guys I've seen aren't even using amps at all. They're actually just direct lining and getting it all in their in-ears, and it's working out great for them. The only thing that freaks me out about putting all my trust in a digital box is if that unit fails, or even if in the middle of a gig it glitches and you lose all your settings and programs in the middle of a gig. I mean, what do you do? I mean, what did you do? Anybody who's been in this position, if there's anybody watching this, what did you do? I would genuinely love to know. And what are you doing now to make sure that doesn't happen again? Put it in the comments. I mean, I'd love to hear this. Because I have several friends that are using Kempers and whatever, and as of yet, I take it hasn't been a problem, but I'm sure it happens. It's got to happen. It's digital stuff, Even with stomp box pedals. I mean, at least you have, usually if a delay pedal goes down, you can still get yourself through a gig, but it rarely does everything all break down at once. So anyway, I'd love to hear. Okay, so two tools that are great for fixing bad sounding amps are compressors and EQs. And even if you're not a compressor kind of guy, a good compressor can punch up an otherwise saggy, wimpy sounding amp. And you don't have to squash the crap out of it. You just to get a little bit of that front attack. And I've owned about every compressor you can think of. And I find they're not a one-size-fits-all. There's some compressors that are better for the funky stuff. Some are better for the chicken picking. And then some are better as the leave on all the time subtle compression, which, if you're not a compressor guy, that's probably the compressor you want, is the one that's most transparent, doesn't have a real squashy quality about it, and something you can just kind of leave on all the time, and it just kind of makes things sound a little punchier and a little better without killing your dynamics. And actually, my favorite compressor for doing that is actually the Demeter Opto Compulator. It's really transparent. It doesn't mess up the tone. So that's what I have here. So kind of gives those notes a little punch, but it's not squash. It doesn't squash it to death. Okay, so moving on to EQs. So I have several different ones I use for different situations. The FX40B is a pretty good off-the-shelf EQ. Unfortunately, they don't make these anymore, and they're really hard to find, and the price seems to be going up on them. Of course, there's the GE7s, which I actually have three of these, all modified a little bit different. One of them is pretty stock, except for I changed the op amps on these to make them quieter. Now this one and the one I have on my board now all have different frequencies, and they're different from one another. This one has some upper mid-range frequencies that you don't normally get on the stock models. The other one has like a lower frequency. In fact, I put it has a 400 and a 500 hertz both on there, which, you know, is you don't see EQ pedals usually they usually have one or the other. They usually don't have both 400 and 500. But those are two really important frequencies, in my opinion. And then there's this guy. I had two of these. This was my original one from high school. I actually had two of them from high school. An early 80s DoD 6-band FX40. This one, of course, I modified to be true bypass, and I made the 3200 frequency into a presence control, basically. I just upped the cap to it's a much higher frequency. And this thing, I should do a whole video on this thing. This thing is pure magic with a Marshall. No other EQ sounds like it. So even the 40B doesn't sound the same. It's just there's something different about it. But anyway, this is another way, a great way to really punch up an amp, and of course dial in frequencies that you're not getting out of the amp. You know, add some stuff in, take some stuff away, whatever. You know, kick in. You can get all this cool low mid frequencies, and you know, as well as the high end on these. I use a lot. It's usually on the Boss. It's a 6400, and it's a great presence control. You know, an amp that's really dull, that will really sparkle it up. If an amp kind of has a scoopy sound, that's where I like the 400, and in this case a 500 hertz. You know, bump those up a little bit. If it's lacking low end, add a little bit of 200. Maybe a little bit of the 3.2 if you need a little bit of pick clarity. Great pedals. Great tools. Okay, so let's talk about overdrives for a minute. Now, for years, using old Marshalls all through the Greg Raleigh band days, and of course back in the early days, I was using the amp gain. Now on the 900s, which when I started using a lot of backline rented gear was in the mid 90s, and pretty much that was the amp that everybody had, all the backline companies had. So I actually would use the clean channel and crank it. I would just turn it up as gainy as it would go. I would stick an EQ pedal in the loop and, get all these great mid-range tones. And then I would hit the front of it when I need it for a lead boost with either a Tube Screamer or an SD1. I kind of preferred the SD1. It had a little more bite. Here's another one. This is a little Klon clone. Everybody, you see these all over the internet. They're cheap, Chinese made, $30, but they sound amazing. I'm a fan of dual overdrives, especially going back to the backline rented gear thing. This kind of gives you almost like a 4-channel amp kind of vibe, where you have your clean channel with no overdrive. Then you have the first channel can be either kind of a clean boost or just slightly distorted. Second channel can be more of a lead tone, and then together, they can be, you get the heavy, high gain kind of thing. And the other thing I like about having the dual drives in one box is, for one, it saves space on the pedal board. It's only using one power supply for one, so you only have to have one cable. It's one less connector to go bad in between pedals, and the switches are close enough that you can step on them at the same time. So in a lot of cases, I'll go from like a rhythm channel to a lead all in one step. Another one that's pretty good off the shelf was the Mesa Boogie Flux drives, and this is literally 2 stock Mesa Boogie Flux drives put in one box. If you're ever going to go do a jam or set in with someone, you can just grab one pedal and you got, lead, rhythm, high gain, overdrive, everything all in one little box, and it's super convenient. If you can keep the amp sort of clean and get everything from a pedal like this, it just makes it more consistent and easier. Okay, so I decided to go with the Marshall here. I have the Mesa Boogie Dual Flux Drive going here. The first overdrive is set very subtle. The amp is pretty clean. The second one is kind of the lead channel, and you can hear that's like the lead. That's the more subtle. Now together you get and I actually have that DOD EQ hooked up here. Listen to the difference here. With the EQ in. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so lastly, I want to show you one of these things. You got to make one of these. These are all it is a volume in a box. And if I remember right, I think the value of pot I used might have been a 50K. But what it's designed really to go into an effects loop. Although you can use it in line after all your gain pedals, and it still kind of works. But in certain situations, like when I was using the Fenders with Creedence, the Creedence gig, like the DeVilles, what are they called, a hot rod DeVille or whatever, those are real common on the backline rider. There's a certain spot until you get it up to about, I don't know, 2 or 3, where if it's anywhere below that, you have absolutely no high end. And unfortunately, by the time you get it up enough to where it sounds good, and of course, if I'm hitting it with the, you know, the front of it with some of these pedals, for certain venues, like kind of casinos with the blue hair crowd or whatever, you know, sometimes it was too loud coming off the stage. Outdoor was never really a problem. But if you put one of these in the effects loop, it automatically gives you a master volume, so you can always keep your input volume set exactly where you want it, and just roll it back a little bit, and you don't change your input gain structure. Really handy thing to have. Works if you have a Marshall that has an effects loop. It works really well in those as well. You can use them in the front, because I find the AC30s is the same kind of thing where you go from nothing, and then all of a sudden it's just on at a certain volume, and sometimes by the time you're done hitting it with all the pedals, that volume may be too loud for a certain room. So if you put this after all your gain pedals going into the input, it turns down how much input's hitting the front of the amp. But it's different than turning your guitar volume down, and it sounds better to be able to get the amp up a little bit and get it working, and then just turn down your input signal using this. That's it. Not rocket science, pretty simple, but all these things are kind of a way to be able to get through using rented backline and without pulling all your hair out. So anyway, thanks. If you like, subscribe, hit like. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.